Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 18th of November, 2022, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me by video link, we've got Patrick Henningsen and Vanessa Beeley. Welcome to the programme. Both, we're going to get straight on here with the G20, which finished on Wednesday, of course. The comments or the announcements from the G20 came out yesterday. Let's just cover a little bit of what was said, beginning with vaccine passports. We acknowledge the importance of shared technical standards and verification methods under the framework of the International Health Regulations 2005 to facilitate seamless international travel interoperability and recognizing digital solutions and non-digital solutions, including proof of vaccinations. That should capitalize and build on the success of the existing standards and digital COVID-19 certificates. And just to remind everybody, of course, meanwhile in the UK, this is the latest guidance on using the NHS COVID Pass to demonstrate COVID-19 status if you're traveling abroad. So undoubtedly, this is at the forefront of the policy agenda that's come out of the G20. It went on talking about mRNA vaccines. We recognize the need for strengthening local and regional health product manufacturing capacity, and cooperation, as well as sustainable global and regional research and development networks to facilitate better access to vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics globally. We support the World Health Organization mRNA vaccine technology transfer hub, as well as the spokes in all regions of the world, with the objectives of sharing technology and technical know-how on voluntary and mutually agreed terms. Central bank digital currencies. We welcome the successful completion of the G20 Tech Sprint 2022, a joint initiative with the Bank for International Settlements Innovation Hub, which has contributed to the debate on the most practical and feasible solutions to implement CBDCs. And just a reminder that just a few weeks ago, the Bank of England, following up on their announcements over the last couple of years, but saying that they are now seriously looking at this as an option. Then we've got carbon taxes. We're committed, the G20 said, to promote investment in sustainable infrastructure and industry, as well as innovative technologies and a wide range of fiscal, market, and regulatory mechanisms to support clean energy transitions, including, as appropriate, the use of carbon pricing and non-pricing mechanisms and incentives. Here again, I just want to remind everybody that, of course, this began, or at least the one iteration of it began at COP26 when Mark Carney, the UN Special Envoy for Climate Action, launched the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. And if you want to know about that or more about that, have a look at Ian Davis's article, The Not So Great Carbon Reset Part 2. And then we come on to, well, what I'm calling commodity data. So the COVID-19 pandemic, the G20 has accelerated the transformation of the digital ecosystem and the digital economy. We recognize the importance of digital transformation in reaching the strategic development goals. We remain committed to further enable data-free flow with trust and promote cross-border data flows. So again, we have the British government absolutely pushing this. This was announced, we covered this on the news a couple of weeks ago, the fact that the Department for Health and Social Care loosening the restrictions on who can be in receipt of medical data in the UK. But let's look at the situation in a broader context, because here's Infosys. And this website here, which is Tom's Corner of the Internet, is highlighting the fact that Infosys had publicly published Amazon Web Services keys for over a year. And if we just look at the quote here from this, so this is definitively something, Tom says, this is definitively something that should have been reported to them. That's Infosys. I always let my curiosity get the better of me. So I listed the root of the Amazon storage. And from the content, it seems that the bucket contains data used to train COVID prediction models. Inside the Johns Hopkins Hospital directory, there appeared to be file names that looked like they contained some form of clinical data, which I did not exercise to verify, but nonetheless, clinical data on there. Now, we should remember who Infosys is. This is the company which is owned by Rishi Sunak's parents-in-law or father-in-law. So direct direct connections there to the British Prime Minister. Infosys clearly doesn't care too much about maintaining protections on people's personal information. But don't worry, we're releasing the restrictions on who can share and how data can be shared. And just as a brief comment on emphasis, if we have a look at this article from 2012, A Government of Common Purpose, Martin Edwards highlighting that David Cameron had met Common Purpose course participants at the Infosys headquarters in Bangalore. So quite a nest there of connections, but do we trust them to look after data? Of course not. And then finally on this disinformation, and we acknowledge the importance to counter disinformation campaigns, cyber threats, online abuse, and ensuring security in connectivity infrastructure. So we're going to come on to disinformation in the EU with Vanessa in a second. But just before we get to that, I just wanted to get your thoughts, Patrick, because there was quite a lot to unpack from the G20 announcement.
Yes, that's correct. Well, my thoughts on that are that the obvious problem there is that this issue of the digital passports is being ratified um, basically away from the democratic process. In other words, we're not able to vote on this. This isn't something that the electorate of any of these countries, this thing that's going to affect everybody's lives. We don't have any say in that. It's being done by fiat at this sort of globalist NGO level. There are these sort of processes in place, these sort of agreements in terms of normalization of travel and standardization of public health precautions, i.e., some way to deal with pandemics or vaccinations. There's WHO agreements. That's all kind of embedded in what you just said. But the problem is this takes it a step further. And the fear is, as it was before 2 years ago, that if one country or two countries do it, then everybody has to basically do it to normalize the process. So it's all being done outside of anybody's decision making with any particular country, certainly not the electorate. That's what it was like with the war on terror, with all the various security protocols and barriers that we have to still endure. And I think it's the same thing, as the same problem has arisen here. So it's going to be a very difficult one to tackle because it's hard to know where to tackle it.
Indeed. So, Vanessa, the last slide there, the last comment from the Bali summit was acknowledging the importance to counter disinformation campaigns. So let's start off with the European Union and the latest. And of course, they're talking about the war in Ukraine related to disinformation.
Yeah, I mean, basically, there was a recent, on the 11th of the 11th, actually, there was a recent, what they call it, session, two sessions, reference the war in Ukraine, lessons learned in countering information manipulation. There's new terminology for it there. Of course, I think it was a couple of months ago that we reported on UK Column that there had been a conference held that was overseen by the US State Department in Ukraine, Western Ukraine itself, effectively concluding that dissidents or people who were challenging the establishment narratives were to be known as either war criminals or information terrorists. And of course, this is the patterning that we're seeing across the board. This is in the framework of the EU partnership with Aspen UK, the EU delegation to the United Kingdom organized a two-panel conference on countering the Kremlin's disinformation. Of course, there's no disinformation whatsoever from the West, is there? And information manipulation in the war in Ukraine. Experts from the European External Action Service, the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Offices, who are effectively experts in disinformation and information manipulation, behavioral insight, etc., and practitioners from Ukraine gave an overview of the Putin's government practices and had a thorough exchange on the lessons each of them has learned from countering them over time. But then let's have a quick look at some of the people involved. I again recommend that people go to the website and check it all out for themselves. We can only take a very sort of shallow dive into the information in the time we have. But let's have a look who was involved in the first session. Of course, Andy Price, the FCO's head of counter disinformation. And where's he from, Mike? as UK Column pointed out a fair while ago, and of course UK Column has been covering the Andy Price saga for some time. He was, of course, heading up Integrity Initiative, and of course that was created to do the work of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office's Counter Disinformation and Media Development Program. To pursue that agenda, the Institute for Statecraft, as you wrote yourself, Mike, the charitable think tank behind Integrity Initiative, received basically 1.2 million from the FCO over the course of 2018. What is Andy Price doing now, according to an article by Kit Clarenberg in the Grey Zone? They've been talking extensively about Andy Price's relationship with British journalist Paul Mason. Leaked emails reveal how Mason's war on the anti-war left was conducted in close coordination with Price, and how the pair discussed constructing an intelligence-supported info-op that would be publicly presented as an organic grassroots endeavor. Sound familiar? They plan to call it the International Information Brigade, in effect, Integrity Initiative 2. So that gives you some indication of the caliber of the panelists in this disinformation conference. Now, the second panel basically goes into some detail about the 2022 Code of Practice on Disinformation. I don't know if you've covered this previously, but I've again cherry-picked from the strengthening of the Code of Practice of Disinformation, which has been signed and presented on the 16th of June by 34 signatories who have joined the revision process of the 2018 code. So what does some of that consist of? It contains 44 commitments, 128 specific measures in the following areas. And again, I've just sort of picked out the ones that are perhaps either most alarming or most relevant to the work we do. For example, demonetization, cutting financial incentives for purveyors of disinformation. Again, who determines that someone is purveying disinformation? The strengthened code aims to ensure that purveyors of disinformation do not benefit from advertising revenues. Signatories commit to stronger measures avoiding the placement of advertising next to disinformation, as well as the dissemination of advertising containing disinformation. And then moving on again, empowering the fact-checking community. I'm sure everyone is now breathing a sigh of relief that the fact-checking community that so far has failed to identify any real facts whatsoever, either on COVID, Ukraine, or Syria. But the new code will extend fact-checking coverage across all EU member states and languages, and ensure that platforms will make more consistent use of fact-checking on their services. Moreover, the code works towards ensuring fair financial contributions for fact-checkers' work. So in other words, fact-checkers are going to be better paid than the actual disinformation providers or purveyors, and better access to fact-checkers to information facilitating their daily work. So what this effectively means, the censorship on all of our work is going to extend, and fact-checkers are going to be empowered further. Transparency Center and Task Force. The Transparency Center, accessible to all citizens, will allow for an easy overview of the implementation of the code's measures, providing transparency and regular updates of relevant data. The task force is composed of representatives of signatories, the European Regulators Group for Audiovisual Media Services, the European Digital Media Observatory, and the European External Action Service, and is chaired by the Commission. So here is the EU, not only the UK, of course, getting involved from the point of view of online harms, but here is the EU strengthening its fact-checking and its determination to censure and destroy any dissident media.
Yes, and well, look, the issue of disinformation and counter disinformation is something which began with the United Kingdom and their claim. Well, it effectively really started gaining traction with the exposure of the Integrity Initiative, and therefore the UK started pushing hard to call certain people purveyors of disinformation. But one of the other narratives that's been developing over the last 2 or 3 years in parallel is this idea that people who don't follow or who challenge the government narrative or the mainstream media narrative on anything are right-wing extremists. And this is something that we've seen developing in the UK again, beginning, and it's now heading into other countries. Now, we mentioned this briefly a couple of days ago, but let's get up to date on it with the issue of the Dutch government labeling so-called dissidents right-wing extremists. This is almost like the new anti-Semitism.
Yeah, it is, and even beyond that, Mike, because actually in the actual documentation, they go as far as to call them, and this again is echoing the language used in Ukraine by the SBU, intelligence services, by the State Department, and so on. That those that are challenging state narratives become information terrorists and can be prosecuted as such, and that is effectively what we're seeing in the Netherlands, as reported by the Counter Signal. Dutch government labels dissidents right-wing extremists, as you said. But here, the Dutch government released a terrorist threat assessment this week, labeling people who protest COVID-19 or globalist environmental policies as right-wing extremists. A tweet by Sander 2021, the Dutch National Coordinator for Counterterrorism and Security, released a threat analysis report. Dutch civilians who mistrust their government, so even, mistrusting your government falls under this. And remember that BBC commissioned report by King's College London that I highlighted last week related to the Mariana Spring article attacking Richard D. Hall. Media and scientists are assigned as potential anti-government extremists. Translated citations of this report attached, and I'll put those up now. So it's translated from Dutch. So anti-government extremism, and he's highlighted the most important point here. In the Netherlands, a group of anti-government extremists is targeting from a fundamental mistrust, anger, and sense of injustice against the government and other institutions. I'm assuming that's a Google translation, hence it's not brilliant. And again, here, they focus from a fundamental mistrust, anger, and sense of injustice against the government, but also wider to other institutions. They resist the way in which politics, the legal system, the media, and the science are fulfilled. The radical undercurrent is not only in this mistrust, polls show that more than half of the Dutch have no confidence in the government, which is actually an even higher figure shown than the one shown by King's College London in the UK. But then the article finishes up, the Dutch anti-terrorism branch also labeled people who protest globalist policies pushed by the World Economic Forum as extremists and conspiracy theorists. Some of them embrace conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories detract from public trust in the institutions of the democratic rule of law. How democratic is it to shut down completely on freedom of speech? As you pointed out, Mike, the UK, through its legislation and its various bills, is becoming closer to a Nazi type of government than a democratic one. The spread and normalization of such theories can give rise to the commission of extremist and even terrorist acts. So here we come. Just as they are claiming that we are extremists, their language is becoming more and more extreme in an attempt to be able to prosecute us for actually mistrusting them, number one, and then demonstrating evidence for why we mistrust them. And this eventually will incapacitate our ability to question our government. And you've been seeing that for some time with the government responses to the FOIs.
Yes, indeed, indeed. Well, look, thank you for that. Now let's move on to Twitter. Patrick, of course, Twitter being one of the main social media platforms at the heart of this whole disinformation debate and the freedom of speech debate. And since Elon Musk took over, many people on the, shall we say, the left side of politics are very concerned about what the implications are for the control of narratives and so on. But in the meantime, Elon Musk is trying to get Twitter back on track.
Sure, sure. It's more like a purge that's going on at Twitter. Is Elon Musk, the new owner, is private owner now. It's trying to make it profitable. It's trying to shape up the company so it's actually making money. So it's going to have to do a number of things, including possibly lay off, thousands of staff and rethink how the whole company is constructed, is working. So he's laid down an ultimatum here. Basically, anybody who's not prepared to come in the office and work really hard or extremely hardcore, as he puts it, you're sacked basically. So there's talk of the employees saying they want to unionize. There's all sorts of chatter on social media, but at the end of the day, I don't think that's going to go very far. But what it is a lot of these people are content moderators and people working remotely, and this is just seen as a big drain. The whole point here is that Twitter was not running like a business, maybe even from the beginning, but when it had funding and when it had achieved escape velocity in terms of a big social media company, they don't function like a business. They're not accountable. They don't have to show a profit. They don't have to show that they're sustainable. It's basically Twitter became a political project. That's the point. And its main goal was to censor the public square. That became Twitter's main raison d'etre. Yeah, there's a lot going on in terms of information, and it provides various platforms for people to say certain things. Emergency services, official government agencies, businesses, everybody uses Twitter. But the political conversation is heavily moderated by fact checkers, by content moderators, by automated AI algorithms. So this is the problem, is this trying to regulate, and Twitter is a microcosm of what the government wants to do. And the government is working with Twitter to ban and censor people. That's been shown now. That's proven. That's going to come out in a congressional investigation. More of that's going to come out. There's a number of lawsuits that are in federal court right now about this very thing, banning people over COVID, meeting with public health, DHS, FBI, in order to delete posts, come up with blacklists and things like that. They're trying to regulate and centrally manage the information space. So it's the same thing as the Soviet Union trying to regulate and manage the economy. It's no longer a free market. It's going to become dysfunctional very quickly. The same with the information space. If this is the route that governments are determined to go down, but they need to collude with big tech firms at the moment to do that. And Elon Musk doesn't look like he's going to be playing that game. So he's going to butt heads with the government on this eventually, and it probably be they can come after him a number of different ways. So this is something to be concerned about. But there's a video of a Twitter employee. I guess this was. I think it's legitimate. I think it's real. This is pre-Elon, or before Elon, BE. This is of the BE era, and this is her on a typical, coming into the office. I don't know, just visiting the office, not working there, but visiting there. It's pretty amazing. If you want to roll this one.
To a day in my life as a Twitter employee. So this past week went to SF for the first time at a Twitter office, badged in. Honestly, took a moment to just soak everything in. What a blessing. Also started my morning off with an iced matcha from the perch. Then I had a meeting, so quickly scheduled one of these little pod rooms, which were so cool. They're literally noise canceling. Took my meeting, got ready for lunch. Look how delicious this food looks. Oh my goodness, I was so overwhelmed. Then made my way down to this log cabin area. I don't know what this is, but it was really cool. Played some foosball with my friends to kind of unwind a bit. Also found this really cool meditation room that I thought was super neat. I didn't do any yoga, but they have this yoga room if you are a yogi, so also thought that was really cool. Had a couple more meetings in the afternoon, had a ton of projects that we needed to knock out. Say hi to my teammates. Went to the library to kind of get some more work done. Obviously had to have our afternoon coffee, so made some espresso. And then before leaving for the day, had some red wine that's on tap. Went up to the rooftop and just honestly enjoyed the beautiful weather. So awesome trip.
Just like the UK Column Office, Patrick.
Yeah. So Elon Musk getting rid of the cafeteria. So it turned out he's spending millions of dollars per year on staff food, and that's all going basically. So he's basically trimming all the fat. I mean, pretty incredible. I think that's authentic. I think but it's doing the rounds on social media in conjunction with this latest uproar at Twitter. So interesting, but we'll see how this situation unfolds over the next couple of months.
Yeah, I mean, Vanessa's talking about the disinformation situation in the EU. We know what's happening in the UK. We know what is attempting to be happening, has been attempted to happen in the United States with respect to this. Do you think Twitter will be able to take a stand against some of this legislation that's appearing around the world, particularly the EU, because they tend to have a much stronger enforcement?
Yeah, I mean, they could easily take the same route that Rumble took, which was, I mean, Elon Musk he's kind of an FU guy. He'd be like, well, FU, like Rumble said to France. France is, oh, well, we can't have Rumble on French airwaves or in the internet because you guys have RT. And until you delete RT or block RT, we're not going to, we don't want to allow Rumble. Rumble said, well, FU, we're not deleting RT. So, and we don't care about the French market anyway. So piss off, basically. I mean, that's the attitude I think Musk is going to have, because a lot of more people are dependent on Twitter. And what you're going to find is a lot of people in these countries in different markets are more dependent on Twitter for basic functions of communication than Twitter is on that particular government in terms of ad revenue. So if you look at the scale of Twitter right now, where its money, where its income is coming from, I mean, Elon Musk has already done a couple of optimization exercises in terms of advertising that will immediately could potentially double their ad revenue within like 12 months. So he's already sort of going to be making changes like that. So it might come down to that. I think it's going to raise this conversation, this debate to a more adult level, because at the moment it's been headmaster student, and governments have been able to say and do things and assume things that are just patently ridiculous and against every single principle in their constitution or any of the values or democratic values that they pretend to uphold. They've been able to sidestep and get away from actually engaging in a hard debate on all that. And maybe this situation might raise that issue a little bit more into the conversation, where people sober up a little bit and realize what they're attempting to do, which is like put an Orwellian grid down on speech and communication, which is what governments in Europe and in the U.S. as well would like to do.
Yes. Okay, thank you for that. Now, if you like what the UK column does, you would like to support us, please head over to community.ukcolumn.org. There are options to help us out there. Become a member, or you could grab a membership for somebody for Christmas. Membership vouchers are available on the UK column shop, but please do share the material you find on the various platforms. Now, obviously on Wednesday, let's move on to Ukraine. We were talking about the claims about missiles falling in Poland and so on. Your first headline here saying Zelensky has backtracked on missile claims. Has he done that?
He sort of has. He's hedging a little bit. As you know, he kind of doubled down on his original statements, which you've covered earlier in the week, that it was definitely Russia. It's definitely a Russian missile, and it could only have been a Russian missile. So when he was doing this Bloomberg New Economy Forum, I mean, I don't know how this guy keeps up or who manages his social calendar, but he's on a Zoom meeting at all of these sort of institutional things every sort of day or multiple times a day. When does he get time to actually govern as a wartime president in Ukraine is beyond anybody's guess here. But this is what he said. I don't know what happened this time. We do not know for 100%. Well, we do know for 100% what happened, President Zelensky. It was Ukrainian S-300 missiles that dropped into Poland on a farm. You guys clearly don't know how to operate your air defense systems, and you're firing stuff all over the place because Russia has denied having any activity on the Ukrainian Polish border. And if there was any evidence that Russia did have any missiles flying around there, it would have already been aired globally. So, like, what exactly happened here? And the president goes on, but I am sure that there was a Russian missile, and I am sure we were launching air defense missiles. So, this is like a really ham fisted effort by Zelensky to try to patch up what he did was attempt to drag Europe and NATO and the West into World War III type situation by going on and demanding that they escalate because NATO, quote, territory has been breached. Okay, NATO doesn't have territories. NATO has member states. It doesn't have territory. Just a little reminder there. So that's what he was up to there. And so he's kind of in a bit of a conundrum, Zelensky, because he's really woken up the Europeans, and they're realizing what a psychopath this guy is, what a charlatan he actually is. And people will start pretty soon realizing that 3 years ago he was doing third-rate vaudeville comedy on Eurotrash television in a European backwater country, and politically a backwater, Ukraine. And now he's president and world president, according to a lot of people. But this whole point of the missiles, just rewind it back to 2021, Sanjay Javid and the comment he made about toe caps. But just a reminder, if we play this.
But let's be very clear, Nick, that if a single Russian toe cap steps into NATO territory, there will be war with NATO.
You remember that one?
Yeah. Yeah, incredible.
So the toe cap. So I don't see Javid. He was very quiet. I didn't see him raising hell about this latest incident. Everyone's gone kind of quiet because when the reality hits, it's a little bit different. It's easy to sort of posture the way they have been the last couple of years. So a lot of people were concerned about how close hostilities are getting. But I want to throw something out because I personally think it's possible that this was more than just an accident by Ukraine. And I want to point to this, which is something that hasn't got a lot of coverage. The CIA director was meeting with Duda at the very moment, almost the very moment that this actually happened. And this is interesting here that he was there. So do you believe in coincidences? And we go on. Not only that, he actually met with Zelensky. And apparently he was at the U.S. Embassy while this thing was actually happening in Ukraine. So in Kiev. So like what's actually going on here? If you look at the pivot that's went on after this, so Zelensky put out his ham-fisted uh, Instagram message or whatever, demanding that we go to war or do something or react NATO. But what it's done is it's opened up the conversation to push towards negotiations. Whether they're going to get there or not anytime soon is anyone's guess. But it's provided a environment where they can pivot away from the previous position, which is indefinite arming and backing a proxy war. And notice that this all happened after the U.S. midterm elections. So I'm going to say there's more than a coincidence here. This could have also been to nudge. Who knows who was behind and how this was executed, this whole scenario, but whether it was just an accident or whether this was kind of a more than an accident to advance certain things down the road to make it politically feasible, even at the expense of the comedian in Kiev. And so here's Zelensky at the G20. Let's just rewind a couple of days. And this was it's incredible. The things that he's getting away with saying is pretty unbelievable. But listen closely to what he's saying here.
It is like, for example, D-Day, the landing of the Allies in Normandy. It was not yet a final point in the fight against evil, but it already determined the entire further course of events. If the victory will be ours in any case, and we are sure of it, then shouldn't we try to implement our formula for peace to save thousands of lives and protect the world from further destabilization?
So he's comparing Kherson City, Ukrainian forces retaking Kherson City or Russia withdrawing. He's comparing that to D-Day. So, I don't know how he's able to get away with this stuff with Europeans, but he's getting away with it. So I might add it's kind of terribly ironic that Ukraine is responsible for the first strike on, quote, NATO territory since Russian operations began. That's kind of interesting and funny on a certain level. But let's look at the peace proposal that he put out at the G20. It kind of look, radiation and nuclear safety, okay, fine. Food security, okay, whatever. Energy security, that's a whole mess right there to untangle, and he's not going to be the one to untangle that. Release of prisoners and deportees, okay, fine. Implementation of the UN Charter, depending on which way you look at the UN Charter. Obviously, he's talking about the aggression principles in the UN Charter. Russia's talking about people in the Donbass and other regions. They're talking about self-determination in the UN Charter. We've gone over that before. Withdrawal of Russian troops and cessation of hostilities. He's not in a position, no one's in a position to demand that. And quite frankly, it's just impossible. They're talking about Crimea being repatriated, the Donbass. It's not going to, it's a non-starter, not going to happen. Justice. So this is kind of a virtue signaling requirement here by Zelensky. He's still riding high, believes that people believe what he is saying. Ecocide and the protection of the environment. That's just, I don't know, forget it. We'll pass on that. Prevention of escalation, confirmation of the end of the war. So he's living in a kind of they're living in a postmodernist kind of bubble there, and it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So I'm going to say this is DOA, dead on arrival. Zelensky's peace proposal is DOA. So here is what he wants to do, and is calling this a mockery. Basically, Zelensky wants to do a public peace negotiations. Basically, he wants to make it a TV show. And Zelensky said he would like to have negotiations with Russia in a public format, aka a TV show, rather than behind closed doors, the way diplomats normally do things. So Russia, of course, expectedly is not having this, and this is what they're saying. Kiev's new idea of a public negotiation, which is an attempt to turn diplomacy in a TV show, proves the unseriousness of its intentions. So they're making these peace demands or proposals that are going to be rejected, and then they'll turn around and say, the way the Israelis normally do with the Palestinians, is we offered you a good deal and you rejected it, so you don't want peace, basically. And Dmitry Peskov goes on, Kremlin spokesperson, said on Thursday that the notion of public negotiations, quote unquote, doesn't exist. So one thing is obvious, the Ukraine side doesn't want any talks. So it's basically designed to fail. That's what it looks like right now. And I might note, Russia has not changed its position regarding negotiations. They've been pretty consistent the whole way. Ukraine keeps waffling all over the place, so you can't really get a read on what they want to do. So it's hard to establish the preconditions for a peace process when you have these two different things going on. And the United States hasn't intervened and told Zelensky to shut up and sort of grow up and bring in some adults to start the process. They're just letting him freestyle. And you can see it's just a joke. So he's pandering to the Western public and the types of people that sign petitions on Evaz and globalist types and parliamentarians in the West who don't actually know what's going on there anyway, and just platitudes, virtue signaling. That's basically the game plan. So Mark Rutte, the Dutch prime minister, one of these globalist cheerleaders, arguably. And so he did this phone call with Zelensky. And after he managed to pocket $100 million in, quote, help or aid. But this is the theater that has become the norm. Watch this staged scene here.
Yes, good to speak to you again, Volodymyr. I hope you're safe. I hope you're doing okay.
I'm safe. Thank you so much. God bless us. Thank you for possibility to speak with you. How are you?
I'm fine, but I can tell you we are following the situation very closely. I've seen, and the whole world has seen, the ongoing Russian aggression against your country, and especially now these days on civilian targets. On electricity and on water supplies. It is truly horrific, and I want to use this opportunity again to tell you that the Netherlands will continue to support Ukraine. We stand by your side during the coming winter, particularly, of course, but also after coming winter, for as long as it takes. And we will discuss many things in this call, but let me start by saying I want to thank you again for your leadership.
Ukrainians for your support and for the support of your society. I wanted to also.
I mean, it's a joke. It's theater. So Zelensky lives in this theater world, and all the politicians that step into his theater world are in this same sort of skit, this pantomime. So here's Rishi and Justin at the G20, and it's good to see that the new prime minister has found a friend in Canada, and they seem to be birds of a feather. They look very good together as well. They make a nice, a fetching couple, as it were, politically speaking. But here they are speaking, doing a Zoom call to Zelensky, and this is all for public show. This is to make it more sort of human, to make it more accessible, the Ukrainian issue. This is why they put out these sort of videos, but they're just laughable. This one particularly is something else. We'll go ahead and roll this.
Prime Minister Trudeau, Prime Minister Sunak, President Zelensky, please go ahead, you're online.
Hello, Volodymyr. It's Rishi and Justin. I really wanted you to hear from us as friends.
We absolutely know how difficult yesterday was. It was horrific for you and your country, and we have called it out in the session that we've just had and on the media here this morning, and we made that point loud and clear to everyone who was here that what your country had to live through yesterday was unacceptable and represented yet more barbarity from the Russians. We stood united in condemning it.
Rishi and I really wanted to reach out to reassure you, to show you we're standing with you, and to say we're gonna figure out this step by step all together. Thank you, Volodymyr. Talk to you soon.
You know, Patrick, on Wednesday's program, we showed the photograph of them together making that call, and I made the remark about the mobile phone. I hope it was an approved mobile phone and so on. But actually, the comedy value of that only comes across in the video, which unfortunately hadn't been released in time for Wednesday's program. So that was just spectacular.
Well, it's good to know that Rishi has called them out. He's called them out in the session. So, I mean, that's going to send a strong message to Russia that Rishi Sunak's been calling them out. So it's really laughable. This is a real clown show at the G20. But and just Justin Trudeau has a penchant for fancy dress. Everybody knows that. So here they are in the sort of the after event, and notice they're with the two heads of state, apparently, with another head of state, Klaus Schwab, who's mingling and treated as a head of state at the G20, but they're all wearing their matching Indonesian-themed kind of seasonal shirts there, looking great. You can do the caption. You imagine what joke Rishi Sunak is telling here. But caption contest for UK column viewers, if you want to put that in the chat box, insert your caption here. So who knows? He's probably telling them which stocks he's going to short in the next market crash. Nobody knows for sure. Those are two people with no mandate, by the way. Justin Trudeau got a very poor result in the election, stitched together a coalition. Rishi Sunak is not elected. He's the latest appointed prime minister in the UK. So it's just bear that in mind. So we move on to there's the three amigos. So here's Klaus Schwab, and it's very important. He was given one of the keynote addresses at the G20. And I don't know if you played this before. It's a very brief statement by Schwab, but he basically lays out his frustration in the slow walking of the Great Reset agenda and what needs to happen to make it real. But go ahead if you want to roll this.
Yep, go ahead.
But actually, what we have to confront is a deep, systemic, and structural restructuring of our world. And this will take some time. And the world will look differently after we have gone through this transition process. Politically, the driving forces for this political transformation, of course, is the transition into a multipolar world, which has a tendency to make our world much more fragmented. And for these reasons, events like this one the G20, and so on, are the very important connectors to avoid a too great segmentation, I would say, blocization instead of globalization of our world.
Yeah.
You can hear the frustration. He said this is going to take longer. This restructuring, this reformatting of global economy, global society, of global governance is going to take longer than we expected. This agenda, this great reset, this restructuring, as he calls it. So he's already sort of pushing it back. And so if we have it, let's say a change of leadership in the U.S. or a couple of other key countries, that could also delay and push that back even further in the next year or two. So this is where we're at right now on this. I don't know what your takeaway would be from that statement, Mike, but what are your impressions on what Schwab just said?
I think my impressions on what he just said, but also what we're seeing from other so-called leaders is a sense of frustration and desperation at the timescales not that they had in mind not being met. And I think what we've been already talking about on disinformation is one of the things that they're most concerned about, because that's one of the things that's delaying their moving along their perceived timescale. But Vanessa, you had some thoughts on this.
Well, no, actually, not really. I just wanted to point out that Rishi Sunak in that shirt looks very like Ben Stiller.
Okay, righty ho. Well, look, let's move on then with Ukraine, Vanessa.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I wanted to just put forward some ideas for analysts to follow whenever these events sort of come to prominence, like Kherson, like the Russian stroke Ukrainian missile. Incredible reporting, by the way, by Western media. I mean, AP, the Telegraph immediately jumped on it, Russian missile in Polish territory, and then flip-flopped about 12 hours later. But just appalling Goebbels-esque media coverage from Western media. And the first recommendation I want to make is he's a Russian military analyst based in the US. His YouTube channel is not that easy to find because it's not actually, it's not under his name. It's under Smoothie X12. His name is Andrei Martyanov. And in fact, I recommend watching his latest offering, which is Goebbels' Factory in Media War Crimes, which again talks in some detail about the life of Goebbels, and then basically demonstrates how many of the kind of media directors in the West have a huge number of similarities to both Goebbels and Goebbels' tactics in producing the so-called news, particularly on the Ukraine project. He has penned a couple of books, one which I recommend, Disintegration, Indicators of the Coming American Collapse, which I think was written a couple of years ago. And then The Real Revolution in Military Affairs, which has had glowing reviews from Pepe Escobar, Paul Craig Roberts, Moon of Alabama, The Saker, and Unz Review. So I haven't read that one yet, but it seems worth looking at. Just an idea. Sorry, the old dog is next to me, and he's in a bit of pain today if you hear him squeaking. Now, he also has a blog, smoothiex12.blogspot.com, and he wrote, I think it's on November the 15th, so a no-brainer really. Kherson increasingly begins to look like a trap for the Ukrainian army. You know, supplies don't arrive, electricity is off, and things of this nature. And then he cites from an RT article, I believe, Russia has targeted Ukrainian energy infrastructure in a massive missile strike, and we certainly have been seeing that over the last few days, that Ukraine is effectively being plunged into darkness. So he then says, make your own conclusions on the desirability of a false flag, referring, of course, to Zelensky's claim that Russia had launched missiles into Polish territory. NATO needs to act, quoting again from RT, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Tuesday, et cetera, as I've just said. And then he himself says, right, because NATO is winning dramatically, wink, wink. He has a great sense of humor, which is why I would also recommend people following him, both his YouTube channel and his blogspot. But interesting that he's now saying Kherson is looking like a trap for the Ukrainian army. Referring to also what Patrick mentioned, that this was reported in the Express, but it's been carried across a number of mainstream media outlets. NATO row breaks out as Zelensky savage for destructive lies over Poland missile. This is very strong language that we're seeing coming out. And I would also mention the meeting between William Burns, the director of the CIA, and of course his counterpart in Russian intelligence in Turkey, the day before the attack. So very interesting that the attack came after this meeting. So one has to wonder what exactly was on the table during this meeting between effectively CIA and Russian intelligence. So basically it says Zelensky would not budge on the issue, insisting that a report he received from the incident left him certain that it was not our missile or our missile strike. His statements have reportedly irked at least one Kiev-based diplomat from a NATO country who told the Financial Times, this is getting ridiculous, as Patrick reported, the Ukrainians are destroying our confidence in them. Nobody is blaming Ukraine, and they are openly lying. This is more destructive than the missile. Very, very strong words there. Now, another person that I recommend, who's also now got his own YouTube channel, Colonel Douglas McGregor, PhD in international relations, President Donald Trump's nominee for U.S. Ambassador to Germany, and former senior advisor to the U.S. Secretary of Defense. He co-commanded the 91 Battle of Easting 73 in Iraq, the largest last armored battle of the 20th century, authored 5 books addressing the issue of an effective modern army. Been a regular commentator for Fox News, but don't dismiss him as a right-wing commentator. And this was a recent interview that he gave actually to a Polish journalist. Mike, if you just want to play a 2-minute clip from that.
Beginning sometime over the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 weeks, whenever the ground freezes completely and the Russians judge their force to be ready, and they will move in and they will finish off this Ukrainian state. Let's not kid ourselves. The regime in Kiev is likely to be annihilated along with the remainder of its armed forces, which over time have become more and more radicalized to the point where now these so-called Azov Nazis and their supporters are not only murdering Russians, they're murdering their own people. And as we saw recently, they actually set out to kill Polish troops that were serving in Ukrainian uniform in Ukraine. This thing is gone badly. The Russians have been running out of munitions, I guess, from day one, according to the propaganda, and the Ukrainians are still on their victory march. Well, that's all nonsense. The Russians are now fully mobilizing to complete this task. The biggest mistake we could make in the West is to involve ourselves. We've done enough damage. And I think what we're going to see is exactly what I described, the total destruction of this rump Ukrainian state. Now, what happens afterwards? I don't know. I'm quite confident the Russians do not want to remain in Western Ukraine. That is the Ukrainian heartland. That's where the real Ukrainians live. Russians aren't interested in that. The Russians will likely withdraw to the Dnieper River. But as far as Kherson is concerned, Kherson is part of this thing called Novorossiya, which was always Russian. Odessa was founded by Russians, although you could give some credit to Germans, who were certainly in service to Catherine the Great, who had a role in building a lot of these cities, along with some Englishmen, Scots, and Dutch, let's be frank. But the bottom line is it was always Russian. It was never, quote unquote, Ukrainian. The Ukrainian heartland is further north above the Black Sea. The Russians are going to recapture Kherson, and the Russians are going to retake Kharkov. These are historically Russian cities. But the Russians are not interested in the rest of it. I just hope that the Ukrainians allow for some sort of emergence of a new government with a new, fresh attitude so that we.
interesting that the common theme between all of the analysts that I'm looking at, so McGregor, Andrei Martynov, and the final one that I would recommend, Big Surge at Substack.com, Big Surge Thoughts, who's relatively new, but excellent analysis. And what is also interesting, he, in his article entitled Sorovikin's Difficult Choice, also talks about Kherson. So he goes through the possibilities of what the Kherson withdrawal was about. So he mentions the Ukrainian army as these are the potential reasons for the withdrawal. The Ukrainian army has defeated the Russian army on the West Bank and driven it back across the river. Russia is setting a trap in Kherson. A secret peace agreement for at least ceasefire has been negotiated, which includes giving Kherson back to Ukraine. And Russia has made a politically embarrassing but military prudent operational choice. So effectively, in the end, what he concludes after sort of some very, very salient analysis is that point 4 is the most likely. And basically what he says, again, that correlates with what the previous two analysts have been saying. He says at the end, in this way, the withdrawal from Kherson can be seen as a sort of anti-Stalingrad. In other words, preventing the isolation and siege of Russian military in Kherson with the winter approaching, and also threats from the Ukrainian army of flooding the entire area. And I can't remember the name of the dam again. I have to check that. So instead of political interference hamstringing the military, which is, of course, what we often see with Western military strategy, he says we have the military freed to make operational choices, even at the cost of embarrassing the political figures, I would add, to some extent. And this ultimately is the more intelligent, if optically humiliating, way to fight a war. So the point he is making, of course, is that Russia's strategy in Ukraine has military intelligence behind it. I don't mean intelligence as in the organization, I mean in intellectual intelligence behind it, rather than political intelligence driving it. And I think that is what the West fails to understand pretty much all the time. One other point that McGregor made in the interview, and I haven't had time to check it, is that the French army would be out of ammunition in 4 days. That drew a sharp intake of breath from the interviewer, but and from myself as well, because what he was basically saying is that the EU armies are simply not prepared for war. You might have a comment on that, Mike.
No, I think that covers it very well. So thank you very much for that, Vanessa. Let's come back to the UK then, well, what was going on in Parliament yesterday. Here is the announcement of the autumn statement. I'm not going to go into any massive detail on this. It's been widely covered on many sources, and no need to do that. But there is the wonderful man himself giving his autumn statement yesterday. Just very briefly, the Office for Budget Responsibility pushed out a few graphs on Twitter yesterday. The economy has entered a recession, and they're forecasting that that's going to last for just over a year. We'll see how good that forecast is, of course. High inflation, they say, results in falling living standards in 2022, 2023, and 2023, 2024, despite significant fiscal support. So the government's spending money, but we'll still see a 7% fall in living standards over the next 2 years. And then they're saying that CPI inflation peaks at a 40-year high, but lower than it would have been without the government's energy price guarantee. And well, if that doesn't show the complete nonsense of the CPI inflation figures, then it should do. Let's just remind ourselves what Liz Truss's idea for the energy price cap. These figures are estimates for what the actual cost of energy is likely to be for the average household in 2023, the ones in red. And if you remember, Liz Truss was suggesting that the government would pay everything to the right-hand side of that blue line. So the government would cover the costs, meaning that the average household would only pay annually £2,500 in energy costs. Well, yesterday the announcement was that £2,500 cap would rise to 3,000 after April, which basically means that from April forwards, the government still has to cover everything that's on the right-hand side of that line. So hardly going to make very much difference in terms of the long-term inflationary effects on this. But anyway, looking at the government's cost of living support fact sheet, I just wanted to mention the examples they give at the bottom of this. They're talking about a single adult working full-time on the national living wage and not receiving means-tested benefits, but the government provides them with all kinds of stuff. A low-income couple with 2 children receiving all kinds of stuff from the government. A middle-income couple receiving all kinds of stuff from the government, and so on. And so what that it struck me very strongly, Patrick, that with so much dependence on the state in this situation, this is a dream come true for them, because dependence on the state comes with obligations.
Yeah, yeah, a lot of strings attached. A lot of strings attached. So it's pushing more people towards UBI, and they're going to be offering, for instance, UBI for people who are working. In some cases, I think that's already that push is already underway. So people who are already working, or maybe they're not earning enough, they're going to be eligible for UBI. So the British economy is still well below where it was pre-pandemic, quote pandemic, COVID. So they've had all of this time to try to make moves and enact policies that are going to help economic stability and growth, but they're not dealing with the root causes. And unfortunately, most of the root causes are from government policy themselves. And again, back to the square one, which we said previously, Mike, that this solution that you can just keep paying people, keep sending out vouchers, keep writing out checks, which seems to be the Sunak Hunt game plan to tackle the economic crisis, is going to exacerbate the economic crisis, and it's going to keep fueling inflation. Don't see any meaningful reversal of course or pivots on green energy policy, on Russian sanctions, and of course on quantitative easing or printing of money. So until you see some meaningful pivots and reversals on those 3 areas, particularly, the markets and the money markets and the energy markets are going to do what they're going to do, which is it's going to get progressively worse, and we're going to go further into a stagflationary cycle.
Yes, people got a quick preview of the next one, but no solutions in the cryptocurrency markets, because the contagion spreads from the FTX collapse.
Yeah, so this scandal is much bigger than what we previously thought earlier in the week, and it goes a lot deeper. I'm just going to quickly show you how deep it goes. So FTX, they're trying to basically coax Sam Bankman-Fried out of the Bahamas, or he's going to have to face the music eventually on this, because there's a lot of angry people. But so he basically transferred assets to the Bahamian government in their custody after bankruptcy. I mean, there's some crazy stuff going on, but you have to remember this guy had developed incredible business and social networks, and the clout that he had has allowed him to do things that a lot of people just assumed were okay, who were working with him, because he had the backing, and he had some very big heavyweight people in government in Washington, particularly in his corner, and institutions that don't want to lose their money. And of course, he's got major institutional investors like BlackRock, Sequoia, SoftBank, who put in, I don't know, they raised something like $2 billion in venture capital. You've got investors in there. It's like a who's who. Remember MF Global, the collapse of MF Global 10 years ago or so. That was a list, who's who of people who, it's all the same people, by the way, who jumped into MF Global. And because it was a sure thing, you can make a massive return. Bernie Madoff, same thing. Here we go. This is the latest. So just to give you the sort of good summary here, FTX story. This is Madison Cawthorn, unfortunately lost his House seat recently, but for an entire year, Democratic lawmakers have stood on the House floor demanding taxpayer money for Ukraine. The whole time Ukraine was funneling those tax dollars into FTX, this cryptocurrency behemoth. who in turn donated them back to Democratic lawmakers. This is, quote, blue washing, says Madison Cawthorn and Kim.com. The FTX thief stole $1 billion from his customers and donated $100 million to the Democrats, 10% for the big guy, i.e. Joe Biden. They actually took a lot more from their customers than $1 billion. It's probably more towards $10 billion, truth be known, by the end of it. But let's just look at how this network is constructed, and you'll see where this is going. I'm going to say this looks like a controlled demolition of the cryptocurrency space, but not the cryptocurrency space itself. It's going to continue to exist, but the how it's viewed in the public in terms of whether it has to be or can be regulated or not. And so this is a controlled demolition, and look at how deep this rabbit hole goes. That's their sister company, Alameda Research. This is where Sam Bankman-Fried transferred $10 billion in customer deposits and used it to make trades or something along those lines. And so that's technically illegal. Sam Bankman-Fried, there he is, the genius, the wonder kind, who had the great and the good in his corner. And there's his supposed girlfriend, Caroline Ellison, who had no experience really to be running an operation of this size, but she's a very interesting person and she's connected, as you will see. And here's another key person that's connected to FTX, Gary Gensler. He's none other than the chair of the Security and Exchange Commission. That is the top regulatory man in the United States. So he was working together with Sam on the Commodities Future Trading Commission. So they were working to craft policy regarding crypto. So you can see how incestuous this goes. So he was right there, step by step, with all of these people. Who's apparently going to be given a lot more power in the coming months with the Biden administration to regulate crypto. So the timing of this is just uncanny, and I'm going to say not a coincidence. And so it's interesting that Gary Gensler used to work under Glenn Ellison, who is the father of Sam Bankman-Fried's girlfriend, Caroline Ellison, who has no experience in managing multi-billion-dollar funds. He's the head of economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where Sam Bankman-Fried graduated from. It's where he got his degree before he started his wonderful career trading on Wall Street, and then jumped to crypto and FTX after that. But it gets even more interesting. Joseph Bankman, the father of Sam Bankman-Fried, is a top tax lawyer, one of the premier experts in this field in the United States. He's a professor of law and tax law at Stanford University. So he is also involved in the conversation, the legal conversation regarding the regulation of cryptocurrency. Isn't that interesting? And would very likely be in touch with people like Gary Gensler working on this as they go as a running concern. But here's the other interesting part. Barbara Fried, the mother of Sam Bankman-Fried, is a major Democratic Party fundraiser organizer, including I believe she's in charge of Mind the Gap, which is a major sort of Democratic fundraising tranche, and get out to vote efforts, and all of these. The ground game for the Democratic Party in the last couple of elections really went through these organizations. So he basically had positioned himself in here with clearly running a fraudulent operation. I would think that Gary Gensler would have known that. Everybody should have seen that, but didn't. And so this looks like the timing of this is unbelievable. And so this broke after the election. So this was a story. Everyone knew this was happening. Everyone knew this was going to collapse and the bottom was going to come out of it. But they held it until the election. That's the important part. And so guess what else just dropped in the last 2 days? And again, this is no coincidence. This is why I'm calling this a controlled demolition of the crypto space. The New York Federal Reserve has just launched a 12-week central bank digital currency CBDC pilot program that's going to enroll all of the major banks in this, including Citibank, Wells Fargo, BNY Mellon Bank, and others. And they're going to be involved in this central bank issued central bank digital currency. And so this is going to be basically setting the framework for how these new tokens are going to be used, and which blockchains they're going to be working with, and so forth. So this has provided the perfect opportunity, a loss of confidence in one part of the market, and then the problem created, and now the reaction, public outrage. Lots of celebrities got burned in this, top athletes, millionaires, billionaires, etc. Lots of politicians, and now the outcry for a solution. What's the solution? It's CBDC. The timing of the rollout of this is almost like it's been scripted. And so I'm just saying this looks incredibly dodgy on a massive level. And it goes into politics, goes into banking, finance, everything. So, I don't know. It seems like that's what's going on in my opinion.
Well, indeed, and well timed with the G20 statement on this issue as well. So, look, I'm just going to give a bit of a warning about the video we're about to show in a second. But we received an email this morning, and I just wanted to highlight this. It's from a source that's saying, I'm an egg farmer from Yorkshire. I wanted to share the attached video with you that was played by a government vet at an avian influenza webinar last night, showing the before and after culling shots of some turkeys and laying hens that had tested positive for H5N1. So the issue of food and so on increases to rumble on. I'm just going to give a warning about this video. Some people may find it a little bit distressing, but let's just have a quick look at this.
To give you an idea of what is happening in a farm, basically I put a couple of videos here. So you can see this is a turkey farm. Okay, this is day one when they report the disease, when they have 4 deaths in the first house, and this is that house.
They look healthy, don't they?
As you can see, the birds are happy, moving, everything is fantastic. You can see the noise that they made. And this is 4 days later. The same house.
And they're all dead.
This is a laying hen.
So it goes on to talk about a chicken house, and the email that we received goes on to say this: as you will see, both flocks had experienced only moderate levels of mortality and are looking in great health up to the point of being gassed and are dead in the houses. Thousands of turkeys wasted and thousands of eggs that will now no longer be heading to supermarket shelves every day. I see stuff like this, and it makes it very difficult to believe something very underhand is not going on with our food systems. And Patrick, very, very briefly, I just wanted to once again highlight Slaughtered on Suspicion, the documentary that we made back in 2014 or something like that, talking about the foot and mouth disaster. And although we're not seeing a slaughtered on suspicion policy in quite the same way, we are seeing the slaughtering, the mass culling of animals on the basis of, in this case, what, a PCR test. This is going to have a massive impact on food supplies, but we have to remember that it was Neil Ferguson and his models which caused the slaughtered on suspicion policy back in 2001, and we see the same type of policy being implemented now.
It's exactly the same, actually, as the foot and mouth crisis. It is slaughtered on suspicion. It's exactly the same. There's this thought that there's avian flu going around, and it's important to ask the question: what is avian flu? If a bird caught bird flu, would they die from bird flu? Any bird? And the answer is probably no. The basis of the slaughter, of the preemptive culling, is to reduce the suffering of the bird. This is one thing that I've seen when I've dug into this. They're saying, well, it'll be hugely painful, and they're going to have sores on their bills and mouth and whatever. And so it's the same type of thing as the foot and mouth thing. There is no evidence that there is an avian flu epidemic, first of all, or pandemic, and B, that it's not even fatal to the birds. So if there was such a thing as an avian flu, they can't show that it's ripping through the population and killing birds. So, what's the point of it? So what is the point of this exercise? That's the question.
Well,
And I
many
think,
people said,
yeah, go
Patrick,
ahead.
that the point of the foot and mouth exercise was to effectively kill the British beef herds. The question is the same policy now being implemented with respect to turkeys and chickens?
Yeah, it's a compassionate call. A compassionate call. So to alleviate suffering of the animal, you have to kill the animal, and like kill animals that are perfectly healthy. So they're using the same methodology they use with COVID, with humans, with mandatory vaccinations. It's all the same sort of program. It's the same type of mindset, framework, and protocol. So the only difference is it's happening in different sectors. So the whole thing is completely fraudulent, in my opinion. And there is no, I have yet to see any evidence of a biological sample of avian flu in any of these birds. So
Yeah.
that's my personal view on it, but it's open for debate as far as I'm concerned.
Yes. Okay. Right. Thank you for that. Now let's just quickly finish off then with the U.S. Midterms.
Well, the aftermath of the midterms. So here it is. Guess what? Yeah, he's done it. Trump has announced he is running in 2024. So this is the big announcement. And I was a lot of people were impressed. Trump didn't go down any rabbit holes. He was calm, confident, and concise. I was like, where was this Trump in 2020? So no sniping, no talk much about the elections in 2020. Just stuck on policies. So that's interesting. So things are developing. It's an early announcement, 6 months earlier than when you normally announce. So we'll see what happens. I think it's healthy for the political system in the United States anyway. But two things happened, which I said were going to happen last Friday. And those two things are that the Republicans would have an 8-seat majority in the House. And that's what it is at the moment. It is currently an 8-seat projected majority for the Republicans. So the Republicans have taken control of the House. The other thing I mentioned is when the Republicans do take control of the House, what are they going to do? What are the first things they're going to do? One of them is mount investigations. And of course, the first one, as we mentioned last week, will be the Biden family. And sure enough, this is what they've done. So this is the first big foray, the major opening salvo for the Republican controlled House, major investigation into Joe Biden himself and the Biden family. It's not specifically into Hunter Biden. You'll see that reported in media. That's not exactly the case. It is the Biden family, President Biden. That's the main focus. So that's going to be interesting. That's going to be painful. And they have a lot of lawyers and a lot of people on the committees that are going to be doing this. So they have specialists to cover different countries. So Jim Jordan and James Comer are the ones heading this, fronting this particular effort. So this is where all the I think action is going to be in the run-up. There might be other investigations. We'll see. So that remains again to be seen. So those two things have been happening, and all of the bad news has been they've waited to release it till after the election. There's just a whole litany of things that were meant to be sandbagged. One of them is Mar-a-Lago raiding Trump's house. Now the FBI, DOJ saying, well, there's nothing really there. So basically, they're starting to walk that back now. So that was a political stunt back in August designed to weaken the Republicans and try to weaken Trump and ward him off of running for president or announcing early. Biden's student loan forgiveness program struck down again by the courts. The courts waited till after the election to make that announcement. The collapse of FTX and all the Democratic donor activity tied to that waited till after the election. So once again, all convenient and politically timed.
Yes. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks to Patrick and Vanessa. We've got to end it there. We will be back in a few minutes for some extra if you're on the main UK column live stream. But otherwise, thanks for joining us. We will be back at 1 p.m. as usual on Monday. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.